You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Dr. Rita Louise.
Too much to learn, you say. Cover up is fine, that's your plan, not mine. I'm ready to be told. Secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age. Time for truth to turn the page. Don't wanna be inside the dark. Live within a question mark. Are they a friend or foe? Tell me now. You need to know.
Hello and welcome to Epic Voyages Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. We have a great show lined up for you. We're going to be speaking to Grant Cameron about presidents and UFOs and the nature of consciousness. If you don't know about me and my work, you can get more information by visiting www.soulhealer.com. That's soulhealer.com. And before I bring Grant on, I'd like to make one quick announcement. People that are familiar with my show, Just Energy Radio, that airs here on Thursday evenings, I announced that my video icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients, has just been released on Amazon Digital Download. And so if that's something that you're interested in, ancient alien type material, please go to soulhealer.com, or you can find it on Amazon. And we would love your support. I would love your support. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Grant and get him on the air. Grant Cameron became involved in ufology in 1975 with personal sightings of an object which locally became known as Charlie Red Star. The sighting occurred in Carmen, Manitoba. In the past few years, Cameron has turned his research interest to the involvement and action of the President of the United States in the UFO problem. He has made 20 plus trips to the National Archives and most of the various presidential archives looking for presidential UFO material. His website is presidentialufo.com. Please welcome to Epic Voyages Radio, Grant Cameron. Hey, Grant, how are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Rita. I appreciate your having some interest in what I'm doing.
Well, and I really appreciate you coming on. And so I want to ask, about your own personal sighting, because I think things like that really kind of form us and where, our life goes. And I never heard of Charlie Red Star. So what was that all about?
Well, I've actually got a theory now. I'm sort of advancing this theory. I've just been working on it the last couple of months, that I believe that if you've seen a UFO, you're part of the game, that there's very little random happens. And when I look back on my sighting from 1975, I've actually sort of come to the conclusion that there was actually some events that happened there that were done to get me to go out there. And what happened was I was interested in near-death studies. I was going to university at the time. I'd done a study at the university, at the hospitals on near-death studies. I was very interested in that. I was interested in Edgar Cayce. I can never remember ever having any interest whatsoever in UFOs. The only reason that we got involved with this is I live in a big city here, Winnipeg, with about 750,000 people. This town of Carmen is about 35 miles southwest, and there was these sightings going on every night. And I said to my friends, we used to drive around the city. I said, well, instead of driving around the city, let's go out to Carmen and let's see what they're doing. I really wasn't interested in UFOs. I just wanted to see what everybody's looking at. And he said, okay, we'll go. My friend said, okay, we'll go. This was in February of 1975. And we didn't go until May of 1975. In May of 1975, a UFO actually got caught on the ground, which is, I think, is the only time it's ever happened in the history that I can remember. And so I think it may have been, they may have actually planned this. And what happened was there was a news crew went out, a television news crew went out. They had, there's a number of crews that gone out, but this one crew had seen this thing, was unable to get it, went back, booked a bunch of overtime. The assistant news director said, that's the end of this. If you guys want to go out, you can go on your own. This is a bunch of garbage. I'm not paying any overtime. So this crew of reporters and guys with cameras all went out, and they actually caught this thing on the ground. The thing was sitting on the ground. They surrounded it, and the thing jumped up in the air. And just as it jumped up in the air, the guy managed to shoot the film. He started to film the camera from 8 miles away, and this thing went viral. This video that they got of this thing jumping up in the air, lighting up the entire horizon, went viral. NBC picked it up. It was, at that time, J. Allen Hynek called it the best nocturnal light film in the world. And it was at that point when I said to my friend, when we saw this on the news network, I said, come on, let's go see what they're looking at. And I went out to see what everybody's looking at. And it's, I always describe it as, it's like you buy the lottery ticket. You know there's a chance you can win the lottery, but you know that you're not going to win. That you're going to go out there, and when you go, nothing's going to happen. We went out there for an hour, and I remember my friend said to me, Larry was driving the car, he said, okay, we'll drive back into town one more time. We'd been there for an hour. If we don't see anything, we're going home. I said, fine with me. This is a total waste of time. As we're driving, the last time we're driving, we're about a mile out of the town. We're driving back into the small town of 2,000 people. The object appeared from the left, going to the right. It was down very low, on maybe 100, 200 feet in the air. It was maybe a half mile. Hard to tell at night because it was in the middle of the night. Hard to tell how far it was, but it was not a light in the sky. It was an object. It was in fairly close. It was moving up and down. It was pulsing. It looked like it was alive. It looked like a heart. It was like a beating, pulsing like a heart. It was like what you'd call like a plasma type craft. And I always tell people, people will always give me this thing about belief. I don't believe this, and I always say, belief has nothing to do with reality. You can believe the world is flat. That doesn't make the world flat. And that's what happened here. Is people can say they believe in UFOs. They don't believe in UFOs. And if you've never seen a UFO, that's all you can really say. I believe it. I don't believe it. If you see it as we did, you know. And nobody at the point when this thing appeared said, "Is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's what it is." What they're like. Everybody instantly said, "There it is." Everybody instantly knew this is what everybody was talking about. It was just so bizarre, and I just fell into the rabbit hole. It was just like I couldn't believe that I'd actually seen this thing, and in so close that I went out 2 nights later I dragged all my friends out there, and I said, "You got to see this. It'll change your life. It's unbelievable," and like just going crazy. And they all took off on me. They waited for about an hour and a half. And they said, "Nah, we're going back. I remember, we're going back to Winnipeg for pizza. This is a waste of time." And they took off. And the thing appeared about 15 minutes after they left. And it came straight at us the second night. And it came in very close. And it was at that point when I sort of decided I wanted to find out what was going on here. And I interviewed a lot of the people in the town. And this book has now been optioned for a movie. And there's a book coming out next year on this whole story of this small town that was sort of infested by UFOs. And when it came down to it, this is 1976, 77, I had the manuscript. I couldn't get it published. And the local publisher here in Winnipeg, who should have published it because it was a big story, everybody knew about this UFO, said to me, "Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers." And at that point, I said, this sighting stuff is a total waste of time. This is a waste of time. All I want to know now is, what was it that I saw? Somebody has to know the answer to what it was that I saw. And I started this pursuit of chasing the Canadian government, chasing the former president of Penn State University, chasing the president of the United States to find somebody who had the answer to what I had seen. And I didn't get the answer until February of 2012, when I got what I call this conscious download, watching a lecture by Colin Andrews in Phoenix, Arizona. And it was at that moment when I got this download about consciousness. And it was at that moment that I changed gears. I suddenly knew the answer to the question I'd asked in 1975. What was this thing I saw? What did it mean? And so for the last 2 years, I've been on this sort of pursuit, chasing consciousness, chasing ultimate reality, quantum physics, all this kind of stuff. And I think I have an answer. If I died tomorrow, I'd be very content that I did find out what this was all about in 1975.
Okay. And we're going to talk about the consciousness part in the second hour. And I do think it's really important. And actually, I keep asking this question to people, exactly what you talk about. So we're going to have a great conversation about it because I think it's very important. And something that people are sort of looking at, but not really focusing any attention on. Yeah. But I have to kind of like, feed the masses because they want to hear the president stuff. So we got to make them all happy.
Everybody's looking for a messiah to save them. And everybody thinks the president is at some point going to make a disclosure. He's going to come out and rescue us from the misery that we're in here. And so I like the stories.
Our president?
Well, that's why everybody gets sucked into voting. Every 4 years, everybody buys the thing that there's some guy there who's going to save them. And they actually cast their vote again every 4 years, believing that something's going to change. And then you see the polls after about 3 or 4 months of the new president, they drop like a stone because everybody suddenly realizes, he wasn't the Messiah. I knew he wasn't. Crucify him, get rid of him. We need another guy. And we just keep this cycle of looking for somebody who's not lying about telling us that they're going to solve all our problems for us.
But it's not even that. I mean, kind of going off topic here. I mean, what I see is that they tell you a bunch of lies and then they get in power and they backtrack and renege on everything they say. And we want to trust them. But it seems like the more people like you and come forward with information, the less we should trust them.
Yeah, I think what it is people sort of, my understanding from what I've learned in chasing the president for 20 years is that basically what it comes down to is the president is not there to do anything. He'll make a lot of promises. It's all about getting elected, and then it's about getting reelected. So basically you put your finger up and you see which way the wind is blowing, and if unemployment is the issue, then you align yourself with unemployment, whatever the issue is. And that's when people talk about UFO disclosure, and Stephen Greer was on the Hill about this, and he went to all the congressmen and the senators, and so did James Fox when he had his big movie came out. And they approached every office on the Hill, and they were both told the same thing. They said, you have to give us some backing. There are people who are interested in the subject who would be willing to help, but you have to give us some backing because it all comes down to votes. If you can provide us 250,000 people on the Washington Mall and provide us some backing so that this is a popular issue, we're going to lead the parade, but not until, because as I've sort of pointed out to people in the UFO community numerous times, the most people we ever got outside the White House protesting for openness on this issue was 19 people in the early 1990s by this group out of Washington, D.C. So basically what it comes down is everybody has all these sort of ideas about government being open on this issue, but when it comes right down to it, it's not a money issue. So we're having a hard time mobilizing people to actually get empowered. It doesn't affect your paycheck. It's not like you're gay and you've got no rights, or you're a woman and you can't vote, or something that affects you personally. We have to find some sort of issue that makes this a personal issue to people, so they will actually turn off the TV and go and protest. Or we've got to motivate the young children or the teenagers, which I think the aliens are doing. That's a whole other story. But that's what it comes down to. But the stories of the presidents are very interested. And I think there's a lot more interest by the presidents. There's a lot more stories about the presidents and UFOs that people really don't know, that I think people would be surprised about.
Well, and I have heard story, it's not even stories. I mean, this was in my lifetime, that Jimmy Carter, for example, and I'm just going to kind of rattle off a few, off the top of my head, that Jimmy Carter had a UFO experience, that Ronald Reagan had a UFO experience, that Clinton wanted to, find out about the UFOs, and get that disclosed. I don't know where anybody else kind of stands on it. But how far back does interest in the UFO phenomena go in the White House? I mean, does it start basically with Roswell, or does it go back even further than that?
It goes back farther, but it is very sort of important to look at the thing, because a lot of people say, well, UFOs go back all the way through history. But when you're looking at the president, and the president is basically given everything. I mean, he's the ultimate powerful guy, that you should be able to find something. If there was UFOs prominent in the, say, 1800s, 1900s, you would see stuff. We do have the incident that occurred with George Washington, where the famous story where he sees the angel, and this angel predicts the future of America and this sort of stuff. Now, this is been interpreted as an angel thing, but you do have contactees who talk about this shining lady, and it's very familiar to me, the Washington sighting, that may be UFO related. It may be this shining lady thing that keeps appearing with contactees. But other than that, you have Jefferson having a sighting where he reports it before he's president, and then you have nothing until Roosevelt. So when people say, well, it's been all this time, I say, no, it hasn't. I've looked very long and hard, and I've asked other people to try to find something in presidential files from like Lincoln or Adams or any of these people, and there really is nothing there. There's nothing that can even be sort of twisted to make it look like it's a UFO story. It's not until Roosevelt, and the big story in Roosevelt is a story that's told by two elderly ladies from Ohio that I actually went and interviewed. And they, one of them has since passed away. They tell the first story that I think is legitimate, and that is that their father, who was a minister he was a religious minister in Ohio, was the second cousin to Cordell Hull, who was the Secretary of State for President Roosevelt. And he left office in 1944. So we know that this event happened before 1944. And the story that these two women told me on camera, I actually went to Ohio to interview these two women on camera. They tell me the story that their father came to them, and the one woman knew exactly when it was because her daughter was in the backyard with her. She was 2 years old, and she said the father was always busy working on his sermons. He was never around. So she remembered very specifically, because the father very rarely ever talked to her, that he came out and he said, well, now that the new generation is here, there's something I should probably tell you. And he begins to tell her this story about the fact that Cordell Hull, when he was in Washington, D.C., took him to the Capitol building and took him down to the sub-basement of the Capitol building. We have checked on this. There was, at that time, in the sub-basement, there was storage rooms. And he was told this story, that he was taken down to these storage rooms by Cordell Hull, and that he was shown what he called creatures in glass containers, like pickle jar type things. And he believed there was 3 of them. And then there was a sort of a metal type craft or a metal type thing there. And Cordell Hull had said to the father, lift it up. And he said, I can't, it's going to be too heavy. He said, no, just try it. And this minister lifted this thing up, and it was very, very light. So he goes back and he tells his daughter in 1948 this story about being shown these events in Washington, D.C. And the sister who was there said she doesn't remember when, it was probably about the same time, but she was independently told the story about her father. So that's the first sort of major event. And you also have the 1942 overflight of Los Angeles, where they shoot off 1,400 rounds of ammunition. Three people are killed. It's in the L.A. Times. It's on the front page of the L.A. Times for about 3 days running, this whole story about this mysterious object that flew over Los Angeles that they were firing at. And the president does act on that. One of the Secretary of War sends a telegram to the president and gives the description of what happened during the night. And all Roosevelt asks is, who has the authority to call an alarm, an air alarm? He doesn't talk about the event. He just says, who had the authority to call this alarm? So whether there was other correspondence, there may have been. That's the first 2 events. The first president that ever has to deal with it on the record publicly is Truman. And that happens in June and July of 1947 at the Roswell crash. And what happens there is that the reporters, as often happens, really aren't on top of the story. And he's actually, the president of the United States, Truman, was actually asked about UFOs, or about flying saucers. They didn't call them UFOs till 1952, but he was asked about the flying saucers and the flying disc 2 days after the Roswell crash, but they asked him the wrong question, and he walked around it. They asked him, Mr. President, all these sightings that are being displayed on the front pages of the newspaper, what can you tell us? And he said, all I can tell you is what I read in the newspapers. And then they dropped the question, and the next president that's asked a question isn't until Eisenhower in December of 1954. So you have these huge periods of time where presidents are really not asked the question, and it happens over and over again. And what I think happens is the reason the president isn't asked is because if you're a White House reporter, you work your way up to the top, to the White House, and you get there, and you're not about to ask the stupid UFO question, because if you ask this question, nobody's ever going to ask your newspaper, whether you're New York Times or Washington Post, nobody's ever going to ask you a question again, because they're going to avoid you for asking that question. And that actually happened during the Clinton administration. Deborah Orrin, who was with the New York Post, which was the conservative newspaper in New York, hated the Clintons. She wrote all the Monica Lewinsky story. And as you referred to the fact that Bill Clinton, according to Webster Hubbell, he came out in a book in 1997, and Webster Hubbell talked about the fact, this is a book called Friends in High Places, and he stated in his book that when Clinton put him over in the Justice Department as the Assistant Attorney General, he said, if I put you over there in justice, here's what I want you to do. I want you to find out the answer to two questions. Number one, are there UFOs? And number two, who killed JFK? Because most people don't realize that Clinton was obsessed with JFK. He was just riveted with this guy. So that was the two questions he wanted. So when that book was released in 1997, Deborah Orrin from the New York Post decided, I'm going to ask the question. So she stands up in front of the press secretary and she says, Mr. Hubbell has written in his book that the president asked him to look into UFOs. Is this true? And the press secretary walks around the question. He says, no, we gave that story to the alien. And what the alien he's talking about is this one that was in the Weekly World News that would predict which president was going to win. And every time the president's election would come up, the Weekly World News would have this alien shaking hands with the president and predicting who was going to win. And this alien was getting it right every single time. So he made this joke. He said, no, we gave the job to the alien. So Deborah Orrin comes back with a follow-up question. She says, is it true what Mr. Hubbell writes in his book? And the press secretary says, I'm not going to comment on what private people put in their private books. And Deborah Orrin said in an interview later, she said, I waited for another reporter in the room to follow up. And they all rolled over and played dead. And nobody ever brought up the Hubbell story again, because that's what it comes down to. You work all your way to the top, to the White House. You want to ask the real smart question about unemployment in Indonesia or it makes you sound like you're smart. So the president is very rarely ever asked a question. Bill Clinton, I think, would be the exception because he's so open to talking about it. So he has faced the question a number of times, but basically sort of still walks around the question in terms of what he knows. Because I do firmly believe, I've gone back and forth over the years, I do firmly believe the president of the United States knows it's just a classified issue. He can't talk about it the same as everybody else in the government can't talk about it. There are rules. He's following the rules. And so that's basically what it comes down to.
Well, and I know I heard Clinton on TV saying, well, I just want to find out about the UFOs. That's all. I became president so I could find out about the UFOs.
Yeah. And yet he says he did it in his second term. And everybody knows it was done in the first term. It was done with the famous story of Lawrence Rockefeller going to the White House. And Lawrence had told Bud Hopkins and John Mack before the president came in, he said, I don't care who wins, whether it's Perot or whether it's Bush or whether it's Clinton, I'm going in there and I'm going to get the president to disclose on UFOs. And I remember Bud Hopkins telling me, I said to Rockefeller, Lawrence, I don't think that's how it works. He said, yeah, that's how it works. I'm going in there and I'm going to get it disclosed. So when Clinton won, he immediately shows up. And because he's a big Democrat supporter and a big name, I mean, with all the Rockefeller brothers, I mean, they couldn't just tell the guy to get lost. So they wouldn't let him at the president, but they cut him off at the science advisor. The science advisor handled him. And they said, okay, what do you want, Mr. Rockefeller? And he said, I want it disclosed. And they said, well, we really can't do this and stuff. And he said, look, unless I get disclosure, unless I get something to happen here, I'm going to put a full-page ad in every major newspaper in the United States, and I'm going to ask the president openly for UFO disclosure. And he said, hang on, Mr. Rockefeller, hang on. What do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? And they said, if it's as deeply held as you say it is, it's deeply classified as you say it is, and if it's as widespread that this cover-up is so big, there's nothing we can do to uncover the whole thing. So what they said to Rockefeller is, Mr. Rockefeller, just give us one case. We'll declassify that one case, and then we'll go after the rest. And he said, okay, I want Roswell. And that's why in 1995, 1994, 1995, the U.S. Air Force reinvestigated Roswell. It wasn't because they decided that they should reinvestigate Roswell that this would be a good idea. It was because Bill Clinton had authorized this. Behind the scenes, Rockefeller put the pressure on, and Bill Clinton said, go out and reinvestigate Roswell. So they went back out. Then they came back in 1995 with the official report. And of course, you remember the official report from the Roswell report from the U.S. Air Force said, no, Mr. President, there's nothing to this. It was a mogul balloon. There's no cover-up. There was no UFO craft. And then what happens, and this is how it works, if you're behind the scenes, you see how this works. You can't directly do stuff. You can't really come out and talk about UFOs. So what Clinton does is he does something behind the scenes. What he does in November of 1995, he goes to Belfast, Northern Ireland. He's lighting the Christmas tree in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and he makes this speech. And what happens is there's a bunch of kids who are writing letters to the president in Ireland, and the two kids that win the competition, the letter writing competition, are on stage. But he doesn't read their letter. He reads this letter from Ryan, which I tried to find, and it does not exist. He says, Ryan, if you're out there in the audience tonight, here's the answer to your question. No, as far as I know, a UFO did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico. But if the U.S. Air Force did recover bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know. And what he was doing there is indirectly telling the U.S. Air Force, I saw the report, I'm very angry about it, you don't talk about the bodies. Explain to me all the people that reported bodies in Roswell, New Mexico. So in 1997, the U.S. Air Force does a second Roswell report. Not because they want to do a Roswell report, because the president is forcing them to do another report. And that's when they come out in 1997 with Roswell case closed. And that's the answer to the president. It says, Mr. President, we dropped these dummies, Air Force 6-foot wooden dummies with Air Force uniforms, with parachutes on them, with signs that say, hand this in for a $25 reward. We dropped them out in 1953. That explains why people in 1947 were seeing alien bodies. And Clinton just sort of threw up his hand and couldn't force the issue into the public. So that's how this game is sort of played, that the president, I think the president knows. The president has the top secret stuff. But what the president is trying to do is he's trying to move as much of that material into the public as possible. And that's what Clinton was doing. Clinton had the answers to the whole thing. He just wanted the answer for the public. He wanted these things to be released to the public. And basically the agency just sort of walked around him. The same thing happened with Jimmy Carter. You heard the story about Jimmy Carter going to George Bush, this famous story that when he was president-elect in November of 1976, he asked George Bush, who was then the CIA director, because what happens when you become president, if you do become president, what will happen is the CIA director from the administration before will give you the briefing. Will give you the classified briefing in November after you win the election. And the reason they do that is because most people who win are governors. Like Reagan was a governor, Carter was a governor, Bush was a governor. They know nothing about intelligence. They know nothing about foreign policy. They know nothing. They're just coming in like new kids in school. So they have to be brought up to speed. So they give them the intelligence briefing. They say, okay, we knocked off this leader. We overthrew this country. We were running this. These are all our people. Whatever. All the secret stuff in intelligence. So when Jimmy Carter came in, he asked for the UFO files because he had made two promises when he was running, that if he elected, he would get all the material out to the public except for the weapons material, which is basically all of it. All the classified stuff is basically got to do with weapons. So he said, I would release it. So he asked George Bush for the files. And George Bush said, I cannot give them to you. You have to go to the House Science and Technology Committee. Now, a lot of people interpreted over the years, and even I made the mistake of interpreting it, that he was denied the UFO files. But he wasn't denied the UFO files because the House Committee on Science and Technology would not have the Roswell files. It would not have all the top secret stuff. It's just a House committee. That stuff is going to be held by NSA, by very high-level compartmentalized agencies. What he was asking, what he said is, if you want the files for the people, you have to go to the House Science and Technology Committee. And that's what Jimmy Carter did. And Jimmy Carter did a number of things that people may not realize. He was working behind the scenes doing a lot of stuff, trying to force the issue out into the public, and ran against all the roadblocks that you run into in government, because people always forget that the president, no matter how well-meaning he is when he comes into public, into the government, Once he gets in there, he realizes his hands are tied. He can't tell the Congress what to do. The Tea Party's doing what they want. The Republicans are blocking issues. I mean, it basically bogs down that he really has not that much power. And so he has to use executive orders and stuff like that. And then he realizes that when he gets into power, if you were to get into power, you suddenly realize that now the UFO cover-up is your cover-up. It's your CIA. It's your NSA that's covering up. And suddenly, if this thing goes down, you're the person who's going down with it. And so everybody just sort of, the same as they do with economic problems, everybody knows we're putting the world off the economic cliff, but we just kick the can down the road. And they're doing the same thing with the UFO thing. It's like, let somebody on another watch do this. We will drill another oil well, we'll do this, and we'll just keep this thing rolling because nobody wants to be the guy who has a stock market meltdown or all these horror scenarios that might happen if there's disclosure. Everybody just sort of says, well, no, I'd rather just, work on unemployment and let's leave that. And if you're giving the briefing, you tell the president, Mr. President, we don't have all the information. If you give us another 5 years, we'll have more information. Delay it as long as you can. We don't really have to tell right now. The more you delay it, the more answers we're going to have in case the aliens happen to be evil or whatever scenario. So if you're giving the briefing, you can scare the living daylights out of the president as to all the things that could possibly happen. And the president just basically throws up his hand and says, okay, I'll play the game. We'll go along with this.
It makes you wonder why anybody would want to be president, because of the politics, because of the, puppeteering, because of the responsibility. Yeah, well, I mean, it just doesn't seem like that fun of a job. Well, and it definitely don't pay enough.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's all ego. That's why you get people who are billionaires running, is because it's all ego, that you need a massive, massive ego to make it through 2 years of campaigning and being put down and all this sort of stuff. So you have a skin like an elephant when you're in there. And these people have absolute unbelievable egos. And that's why I say that they're not about to sort of pull the plug and go down as the guy who released this whole thing, because they want to go down in the history books as the guy who ended the war in Iraq or got employment down to 7%. They want to be the good guy. Nobody wants to take a chance because it's all ego. They don't need the money. They don't need everything. They just need to be the president. And so you can see Hillary now. I mean, Hillary was in a situation where when the Clintons first put their files, what happens is when the president leaves office, he has 5 years to work on his files. And then what happens is the files go to the presidential library that they're building during this 5 years. So when Bill Clinton left office, I knew that it was first come, first serve with FOIAs. I knew who was involved in the Clinton administration. So when the Clintons' files became open in 2006, I was there to file before everybody else all the Freedom of Information Act requests on all the UFO things. I filed 100 Freedom of Information Act requests, and all had to do with UFOs. So when the UFO stuff started to come, or when the files started to come out of the Clinton library, 11 of the first 18 files that came out were all UFO files. And of course, Associated Press picked up on this, Fox News picked up on it, the Washington Post picked up on it. And I was getting interviewed by all these people. Washington Post interviewed me twice for an hour and a quarter. They wanted this whole story. Why are all these UFO files coming out of the Clinton administration? So I said, well, I filed before everybody else. The Clintons were very interested. And then I described the fact that Hillary was deeply involved in the Rockefeller Initiative. There's two very specific documents, and I provided them to Associated Press, I provided them to the Washington Post, and I provided them to Fox News, and none of them would touch the story. And the documents basically state that Rockefeller's, all this 1,000 pages that I recovered while Clinton was in office is this correspondence going from the science advisor to the president, which is Jack Gibbons, and Rockefeller. And these letters are going back and forth. And in one of the letters, Rockefeller says, all the material that's going from me to the science advisor and all the material that's going from the science advisor back to Rockefeller is going through the First Lady's office. And we know that the first time that he went in to brief the science advisor on UFOs, he stopped in Hillary's office on the way out of the White House. So Hillary was involved at that point, that all the material from the Rockefeller Initiative was going through the First Lady's office. The second thing was that Rockefeller, when he was doing this thing, he had this, it was pressure. Politics. It was like, I'll put this ad in the newspaper. And the other thing he had is he had this letter on UFO disclosure. And he said he wouldn't be getting his way. And he'd say, okay, I think it's time. I'm going to send the letter to the president. They'd say, no, don't send the letter to the president. No. Hey, what do you want us to do? And they would sort of try to appease him and get back on his side again. So he always had this letter that he would threaten to put this letter out, that he was going to you have this open letter to the president. And he had a number of people helping him edit the letter. One of the people that helped edit the letter on UFO disclosure to President Clinton was Hillary Clinton. She helped him edit the letter. So these two documents were clear that Hillary was involved in this whole scenario, but none of the newspapers would keep it, would run with the story. And so they're protecting her. Plus, Hillary is not about to go public with UFOs because she's already been burned. If you remember back, when she was First Lady, she was involved with Jean Houston. And Jean Houston was her spiritual advisor. And that the Clintons, when they were in, were bringing all these New Age people into the White House on weekends. It was like their entertainment. They bring in like her and a few other people. And what she was teaching Hillary to do was to basically sort of do this channeling thing where she was indirectly talking to Eleanor Roosevelt. And that was her big hero in history, was Eleanor Roosevelt. So she was talking to Eleanor Roosevelt. And then she was talking with this sort of a channeling type thing. She was talking to Gandhi. And then Jean Houston said, let's talk to Jesus. And she said, no, I don't want to talk to Jesus. And she pulled out. Well, that story was picked up by the Washington Post, and they ran the story, and that was it. It was all over the place. It was like this embarrassment. The First Lady's crazy. She's channeling people and stuff like that. So she managed to put that behind her. And so I would say there's no chance whatsoever that Hillary is going to go public because she's already been down that road of being the crazy person. And she has got this ego, the same as Bill. She's going to be the first woman to be president. She'll kill to get into the White House. She has this ego and it has to be satisfied. And she's just going to play the rules. She's going to say what she has to say. And the idea is not to get things done. It is to get in. That's the whole thing, is to satisfy that ego, to be the first woman president, to be this woman that struggled her whole life, to show that she was somebody, that she wasn't just Bill's wife. She wasn't just somebody at home baking cookies. She was the first president. So it's all about the ego.
She's scary. But John Hogue, the Nostradamus guy, you know, he does prophecy, and that was his hit, was that she was going to be the next president.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if she was. That's how the game is played, and it'll be the same as everybody else. She's just going to play the game. She has to listen to the Democratic Party because she has to get people elected to the House and to the Senate. Otherwise, she's completely stranded. So it's this whole thing. You have to play the game, and you have all these advisors that.
But at least she's used to the game. You know, she's been in and around the game versus, you know, you think one thing's going to happen, and then you show up, you know, on your first day of school, only to find out that. It's a monster, you know.
I think it's actually going to be good that if she gets in, because with the first woman, with men, you're always going to have this sort of like a urinating contest. Like, we're going to go to war. I think if Hillary's there, I think you're going to get a lot less of the sort of the you know, let's go fight with somebody, this sort of thing. So in that sense, but in terms, she's as tough as any guy that's ever been in the sort of the office. And there's people's story. One of the things I advise people to do if they want to look at the president is what you do is you look at the Secret Service books. You look at the people behind the scenes who work for them. And that's when you see who's an idiot and who's a good guy. And then you find very surprising things. You know, like Jimmy Carter was a total idiot. I mean, he was like, and I heard this from people inside the Carter library. I mean, he was not a very likable guy. He played the sort of the Christian guy that taught Sunday school since he was 18 years old. But he was a type A personality. And Hillary Clinton was like that too. I mean, Hillary Clinton had this thing that she, her Secret Service had to stay, I think it was 50 feet away from her or whatever. She was just brutal to the Secret Service, and they basically did not like working for her. She was this very tough sort of woman, and you got Ronald Reagan as being the super nice guy, George Bush Sr. being one of the best liked, which was kind of a surprise, and Barbara Bush. Really? That the Secret Service, and I always say to people, it's very interesting. You read these Secret Service books from the guys who actually worked in the White House and tell you what actually goes on behind the scenes, and you learn a lot of stuff. Which, if you're working on presidents, you got to learn this kind of stuff, like about Bill Clinton's horrible anger. I mean, he has this really, really violent temper that he's able to keep in track when he's in public. But you read some of the books from behind the scenes. His advisor Dick Morris in the 1996 election. Bill Clinton was losing the election, and this is comes into a UFO story. In 1995, Bill Clinton got this briefing. People know about Rockefeller. They go to the Rockefeller Ranch in the Tetons in Wyoming, because the Rockefellers own all the land in the Tetons and have the big Rockefeller Ranch there and stuff. So Hillary and Bill go and spend the 1995 holidays in August at the ranch, and it is there, away from the Secret Service, and not Secret Service, but away from the CIA, that Rockefeller sits down, at least Hillary Clinton. We don't know if Bill was there. We know for a fact that Hillary was there, and that when it was all over, Hillary said, "We've listened to you now. Don't ever bring up the subject again," referring to UFOs. So they were there, but Dick Morris tells the story behind the scenes that Bill phoned him from the ranch and he said, "Get me the hell out of here." He was just furious because what he wanted to do was go to the Hamptons and play golf with all his rich buddies. And the last place in the world he wanted to be was at the Rockefeller Ranch. But what they had determined, and this is how politics works, that he was behind in the 1996 election. This is August of 1995, just before the election. And they had determined from the polls that the swing voters, this is what you're after. You're not going after Republicans or the Democrats because everybody's going to vote what they usually vote. You're going after the swing voters, and it was determined that the swing voters were people who were into the environment, and they were into camping, and they were into fishing, and they were into computers. And so he went camping and he went fishing, and he hated every last minute of it, but he was going after the swing voters, and that's why he ended up at the Rockefeller Ranch. It wasn't because he decided to go there. And he was telling Dick Morris, and Dick Morris said he had to hold the phone away from his head because Clinton was screaming on the phone to get him out of there. So that you get these things, and that's why I tell people, go behind the scenes, read the Secret Service books, read the people who ran the campaigns, and you start to realize what actually goes behind the scenes, and that a lot of these people are just the same as you and I. They have all sorts of personal they have all this kind of stuff, and they can cover all this stuff. That they just cover this stuff up, and they make them look like he walks on water, and they cover all the president's errors because the president is supposed to be this most powerful guy, and he's just basically the same as you and I. He just has this huge, huge ego that enables him to go through all the pain and all the suffering to get there and take all the abuse. And once he's there, he's not about to get unelected, and that's why it's so dangerous for him to do anything really off the cuff and take any chances. He's going to play it as safe as he can because he wants to get reelected.
Well, there's a question in the chat room. This came up a long time ago, but it kind of goes along with what we're talking about. You know, you're talking about the president and then all of these people behind them. But if the president is a puppet, then who are the puppeteers? And that's from Mark123, by the way.
Well, everybody's a puppeteer. I mean, the president, that's why I say the president, when he gets in there, suddenly realizes he doesn't have any power. I mean, you take Obama right now. I mean, he can't do anything because everything he puts out, I mean, the Democrat or the Republicans can block it in one of the House. You have to control the House and the Senate. If you don't control one, you lose a lot of your power. And then he has to listen to his own party. His own party's telling them what to do. And then you have these public interests. And that's what I say when it comes to disclosure. If you're somebody in disclosure, we got to realize the most we ever put in front of the White House was 19 people. We do not donate any money to political events.
Okay, but let me ask you something. You know, I can understand when they're first trying to get elected or when they're trying to get elected for their second term. But I mean, Obama is a second-term president, and so what he does, other than for his legacy, shouldn't matter. And so why don't we see more action and more coming out of things, you know, from the president or the president trying to push things through, because it's not like he has to get votes.
But it's all about his legacy. It's about, how do I want to go down in the history books? How do I want to, I mean, you basically look at him, he's really not doing anything where he doesn't have any power. I mean, even Obama came in as this sort of a real anti-war guy, and he's in this position where he's getting all this advice from not only the Republicans but from the Democrats. We got to do something here with this ISIS group, and he's under all this pressure. And the president doesn't have as much power as most people think he does. And he has people that he has to, like this thing about donations. The most money that you can donate for these, dinners where you go is $35,900. So if you're Steve Bassett and you're the lowest paid lobbyist who makes nothing, are they going to listen to you, or are they going to listen to some lobbyist who gave $35,900 to have a dinner and sit with the president? I mean, it always comes down to who's got the money. Follow the money to find who's got the power. And the president is interested in the legacy, but he has all these different things. Plus, he's hampered by secrecy. If you remember back, this is before the last election, 2012, Obama came out and he made this statement about the fact that they were using drones to kill terrorists in Pakistan and some of these Middle East countries. And the Republicans went after him and said they were going to take him to court for leaking classified information, that he was using classified information to get himself reelected, to make him look like he was a war guy and get those votes that he normally wouldn't get. So that's basically the problem that you run into, is that the UFO situation, as the Canadians were told in 1950, very clearly, it's in a Canadian government top secret document that nobody denies. It says clearly, the Americans told us flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. So if it's the most highly classified subject, they're not going to talk about it. And that's what happened when I got Dick Cheney, for example. Dick Cheney, I got him on the air in a radio talk show in Washington, D.C., just after he came into the White House. And I said, because he was chief of staff for Gerald Ford, he was Secretary of Defense under Bush Sr., and then he was the vice president. When I talked to him, I said, Mr. Cheney, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? Which is what I tell people. If you ever run into a 4-star general with a unified command, you run into a president, a vice president, someone that you think might know, you don't want to ask them, what do you think about UFOs? You don't want to ask them, have you seen a UFO? The only question you want to ask them is the question I asked Mr. Cheney. In all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? If so, when was it and what were you told? Which means, did someone walk in your office and make you sign a secrecy oath about UFOs and tell you the truth of what's going on? And he said, if I had been briefed on that subject, it would probably be classified and I wouldn't be talking about it. And it was, thank you very much. That's exactly what I said back then, and I maintain now. It's just classified. So the president is tied by all sorts. He's a puppet to all sorts of different interests, to all sorts of different rules, and the government is run by rules. It's a very bureaucratic. If you've ever worked in the government or I worked at a university, you realize that you're just a puppet in an organization. You really don't have any power to do anything. I remember in my job, we gave an interview to a newspaper, and my boss and I didn't want to do the interview. My boss said, we're going to get fired. And I said, what do you mean we're going to get fired? I mean, it was like they were just furious. You gave an interview to the newspaper. You have no right to speak on behalf of the University of Manitoba. And that's what it comes down to, is this whole thing that there's so many rules. There's so much bureaucracy that really people think the president is this most powerful guy. He really isn't very powerful at all. And it's really not a cabal, because I really don't believe anymore that there is a cabal. That's one of the things I changed on the president. I really don't believe there are evil people in the government who are trying to cover this thing up. Because one of the things that happened was we went after this Dr. Eric Walker, who was former president of Penn State University. He was chairman of the Institute for Defense Analysis, the top military think tank in the United States. He was an assistant secretary of defense at one point, 14 honorary doctorate degrees, very, very powerful guy, knew what was going on. We were talking to him, trying to get stuff. He said, I can't talk about this. Study something else. I'm not going to talk about this. I can't talk about this. He kept going. We bugged him for 8 years. And at one point, he gets very upset. He said, why should we change the rules to satisfy your curiosity? When I heard that, I went, wow, there's rules. There's actually rules. And so when I say to people, when they talk about the evil government, George Bush, he's evil, he's trying to keep this hidden, I said, do you seriously think that George Bush Jr. or Sr. gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to go to my office today and I'm going to figure out for sure, how do I destroy the world for my grandchildren? Everybody thinks they're saving the world. They think they're doing the right thing, and there's these rules. And people who don't believe there are rules that handicap people in government should. There's a PBS just put out a documentary which is called USA, The Secrets, and it's about Snowden. USA, The Secrets, I think it's called. You can Google search it. And what it talks about is when Snowden came out with all these documents, inside the government, a lot of people inside the government suddenly realized that the NSA had turned all its listening equipment inside and was listening to American citizens. And this documentary goes through all the people inside the government that were going to affect. At one point, there was 13 people in the Justice Department, from the head of justice, all the way down, 13 people who were going to resign because it was illegal. So what I would say is that if this whole thing is illegal, if there's this illegal UFO cover-up, there's going to be defections. There's going to be people who are going to phone the Washington Post. They're going to phone the New York Times, as happened in this documentary. It's a 2-hour documentary. I advise everybody to watch it to see how things actually work inside the government. Nobody is defecting on the UFO issue, which means to me that everybody who's playing the game believes they are following the rules. There are rules, there are laws, and we're just playing by the rules. As Walker said, why should we change the rules to satisfy your curiosity? That's one thing I've changed. I do not believe there's an evil government. I do not believe there's people who are trying to destroy the world, who are trying to keep this. They actually believe they're doing the right thing.
See, I guess I could never be president because there is no way that I would want to keep those rules, and I would just get in trouble and they would fire me.
That's right.
But why is it's true? I could tell stories, but I won't. But why is there a need to keep it classified? And I'm gonna ask that question, and then there's the whole dialogue about, and I want to say Truman, but it might be Eisenhower, that actually met the extraterrestrials, and that was why that it's all classified and back engineering. I don't know. I've heard so much stuff.
I'll talk to those 2 points. I wrote an article. It's on my website, presidentialufo.com. It's in the article section. It used to be called the 64 Reasons the Government has decided not to tell you the truth. I think it's now called Why the Government has decided not to tell the truth, or something like that. And I go through like 64 reasons why the government has decided they're going to keep it secret. One of them, the main things is consciousness, and it's got to do with consciousness, and it's got to do with weapons technology. For example, Jimmy Carter said, I will release everything except for the weapons technology. So let me ask you, if you're the president and you say you're going to break the rules, are you willing to give this to ISIS, this technology? Are you willing to do it? You may say, I'm a good, honest American. I believe in God. I want to save the world. I want to do the right thing. We're going to use this technology for the right thing. Do you seriously think that ISIS is going to use it to end the energy crisis? They are going to use it to kill Americans. And if you're a military advisor to the president, that's what you're going to tell the president. That's what I would tell the president. I'd say, Mr. President, we keep it because we have the secrets. We are the good guys. We keep the secrets. If we let it out, if it gets to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, China, Russia, and name off a pile of them, North Korea, they are going to use it for evil, and they are going to use it to try to destroy us. And the president goes, whoa, okay, no, we're not going to release it. And the question is, why would you release it? Except to say, well, we should release it. It's, the right thing to do. People should have the knowledge and stuff like that. But if you're a military mind, or if you're the government, you look at this. Or, for example, the consciousness thing, which I'm very big into now. You take a look at the Roswell crash. They've known since day one that consciousness was part of this. In this 1950 document I'm talking about, the Canadian government top secret memo, it says, we were told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. This is November 1950. This is before any contactees say they're talking to aliens. This is before any abductees say they're talking to aliens. This is before anybody says aliens are telepathic. 1950 says mental phenomena is part. The reason they knew that had to be because in 1947, and a lot of the stories, there's more and more stories coming out that back this up, that in 1947, in the Roswell crash, one of the aliens was alive. So when they recovered the craft, they went there and they found out there was no steering wheel. They found out that the thing is flown with the mind, and they had an alien standing there talking to them in their head, and they went, wow. Man, if we could do this, we could go and talk to Brezhnev. We could talk to Putin in his head. We could tell him all sorts of things. And they saw the technology. They said, we have to control this technology. We do not want to give this technology to anybody else. We're the good guys. And that's where American foreign policy works. America is the land, the God's chosen race. We are the light on the hill, and everybody else is evil. And we can't give this to everybody else, whether it's for to allow them to have better technology, cheaper goods, better weapons, whatever. we want to control us, because we already got caught in 1957 by Sputnik. We got caught with our pants down, and the Russians were ahead of us. And it was very embarrassing to the Americans to find out that the Russians had put the first object into space. And the Americans in 1957, when they developed NASA and DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which works on all these lead items about technology, they said, never again will we be caught behind. The idea is to get ahead of everybody else, get the technology, and do not be caught by surprise. So you want to control the technology. There's so many reasons. There's the old idea is, if you own Shell Oil, say, Rita, you own $100,000 worth of Shell Oil, and I tell you tomorrow they're going to disclose, you are going to, at the opening bell, you are going to be selling Shell Oil as fast as you can, because if it's $100 a share, it's going to be $5 and heading for $2. Because and that's that's the kind of scenario that may not happen. But if you're briefing the president, you say, Mr. President, this could happen. People start selling Shell, people sell Exxon. Then the people who are in the car industry, they see it selling, everybody starts to sell. And it's like the New York Stock Exchange when 9/11 happened. They closed the stock exchange for 3 days. And they could open the stock exchange for only one reason, because they said, we're going to put marshals on the plane, and anybody stands up on a plane, we're going to shoot them. And everybody went, oh, okay, you've got it under control. But if you don't have the situation under control, if the stock market starts to melt down, what are you as president going to do? There's nothing you can do, because you have to show that you have the situation under control. If you can't show, the thing will continue to sell. People that's what happens in a market, is people don't really sell because they when they see someone selling, they sell. And once it starts to move down, you have to have something to change the momentum and send it back the other way. So if you look at this article I wrote, 64 Reasons, you see stuff that may be right, may be wrong, but if you're behind the scenes and if you brief the president, I say, if I briefed anybody, if I gave you all the reasons, you would do exactly what the president's doing, because it's all about ego. It's about not getting caught with the stock market melting down on your watch or whatever it is. That as Stephen Greer says, politicians are absolutely gutless wonders. It's absolutely true. They want to get elected. They want to get reelected. They try to figure out how to be the nice guy, how not to rock the boat, because they're trying to get votes. It's all about getting votes. It's got nothing to do with doing the right thing, because the right thing doesn't necessarily get you elected. There's a lot of issues that are out there, where there's childhood cancer or numerous things that the president could do, but if it doesn't get him any votes, he's not going to do it. He's going to do the things that get him the most votes because he wants to get elected, and he wants his party to get elected and reelected. And that's what the game is all about. It's got nothing to do with doing the right thing or helping or fulfilling your election promises or whatever. It has to do with getting in and staying in.
So is there any truth to the fact that there are rumors that say that, some group of extraterrestrials has been meeting with the White House, members of the White House?
Okay, that's one I forgot. Yeah, I've changed my issue on that. I say there are no evil people in the government that are, there's deluded people in the government, totally deluded. Crazy, but not evil. They're not necessarily evil. And I don't believe there are any evil aliens. The story about, you're talking about the Eisenhower story, is this story that the Greys came. And the Greys didn't appear till 1961. I don't care what anybody says. They didn't appear till 1961. And this is all a plan. They turned on Betty and Barney Hill. They announced that they were there. Before then, there was no talks of Greys. I don't care what anybody says. There was no discussion of Greys. So now we sort of incorporated the Greys, and we sort of moved them back when they didn't exist. And we say that the Greys came to the President Eisenhower at Edwards Air Force Base in 1954, and that they made this deal to abduct people in exchange for technology, which is totally stupid. And we did this treaty. Number one, what are you going to do if the aliens break the treaty? There's nothing you can do. We're going to take them to court? This is absolute nonsense. The Greys, anybody who knows anything about the Greys, know the Greys do what they want. They can do whatever they want. Nobody's going to stop them. They don't need a treaty to get any advice. And if you look at abductions, there are no abductions. It's basically soul contract. I believe the soul contract idea, that there really is no abduction, there's no evil aliens, there's none of this sort of stuff. So in 1954, if you look at what actually happened, you go back to the actual records, what you will see, there was a document released 2 weeks after, when that story started to break, 2 weeks after the incident, was they were talking about he was dealing with Etherian, with human-type aliens. And that makes more sense. If you take a look at this whole issue that goes from 1945, and I have a photo that I'm going to release in my next book, which was given to me by a Japanese reporter, that shows a UFO over Nagasaki Harbor 2 weeks after the detonation of the atomic bomb, when we dropped the bomb on Japan, there were UFOs there. And this was picked up in photographs that were taken by a Marine. Haven't really gone public. I have one of them that clearly shows this flying saucer over top of the harbor. Nuclear weapons has always been a part of this whole story, right from the word go.
Okay.
That's why they're
we need to go to break, but can we finish this little piece and then we'll move on to consciousness on the other side?
Okay. What happened is that five or 6 days after Eisenhower.
No, we got to go to break.
Oh, okay.
Break.
I thought you wanted me to finish the story.
No. We'll come back to it on the other side because the music's going to come up, and then we'll be like talking during the commercials and all that good stuff.
It's an important story. You got to.
It is an important story. Okay. So I'm Rita Louise. We're here talking to Grant Cameron. His webpage is presidentialufo.com, and we will be back with Epic Voyages Radio after these words from our sponsor. Hello, and welcome back to Epic Voyages Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. We've been talking to Grant Cameron. His webpage is presidentialufo.com. For more information about myself, my webpage is www.soulhealer.com or ritalouise.com. Grant, before we went to break, we were talking about aliens and the whole nuclear connection. So what's that about?
Well, this is a story that comes up often. Is this thing that Eisenhower made this treaty agreement with the Greys to exchange technology. And as I say, it's totally crazy because the Greys do what they want, and you can't take them to court. Your treaty's not going to do any good. And secondly, why would the Greys give us technology with which we're going to turn around and try to shoot them down? I mean, none of that makes sense. If you look at the actual what happened, you'll see that this original story was that he was dealing with Etherian alien type people or human type people. And if you look what happened, less than a week later, the Americans detonate an atomic hydrogen bomb in the Pacific. And it is one of the first ones that's able to go into a plane. They detonate it. It's supposed to be 5 megatons. They miscalculate one of the ingredients in the bomb. It turns out it's 15 megatons. It absolutely wipes the island off. That the island disappears that it was detonated on. The guys that are detonating the bomb are 20 miles away. They have no radiation suits, nothing like that. They have to be evacuated by helicopter with bed sheets over top of themselves, with nuclear fallout falling all around them as they escape. There's a Japanese fishing trawler that's contaminated. 2 of the islands, the wind is going in the wrong direction, and the wind takes all this nuclear contamination and drops it on 2 islands that are still uninhabited. The Americans had to take all the citizens off these 2 islands, and they have paid, the last report I had was $250 million in reparations. It is the worst nuclear disaster ever in the history of mankind. It occurred a couple of days after that rumored meeting between Eisenhower. So I say, if Eisenhower did meet with aliens, it had to do with that nuclear test. They were saying, we don't want you detonating nuclear weapons, because that was the basic message that all the contactees in the 1950s are running around. And they were saying, no nuclear weapons, you got to stop it. You're disturbing not only the balance of the Earth, but the balance of the universe. And so that's what I say it had to do with. If it was a meeting, it was to say, stop the nuclear test. And Eisenhower said, we'll do what we want, get lost. And he still detonated the test, and it went seriously bad. So this nuclear thing is very, very important. And it basically comes down to, why did the UFO thing actually start? And this cuts down to this idea of quantum physics, the entangled universe, this whole idea that all particles are entangled, that if you have a particle in one side of the universe and one side of the other side of the universe, if you change the spin on the photon or the electron on one side of the universe, the other one will instantly balance. The one that is connected will instantly balance out, which means that these things are entangled. Time and space doesn't matter. So if we detonated an atomic bomb in 1945, is the rest of the entangled universe going to know that we detonated an atomic bomb? Absolutely. They're going to show up in mass, realizing that everything's entangled, and that if we're detonating atomic bombs, we're affecting not only ourselves, but the universe. And that's why the UFOs appeared in mass at during World War II and after World War II, that's what the main focus has been, this nuclear weapon thing. And now the message, because we've got the nuclear weapons sort of under control, the main message that you'll hear from contactees and abductees, who are the people that I basically spend all my time with now, because they are the people that if you really want to know what's going on, you can't really tell by watching stuff fly around in the sky and counting green ones and red ones and big ones and fast ones and slow ones. All you can really do to try to figure what's going on is talk to people who claim to have been inside the ship, or talk to the people who are flying the ship. And the people that have been in the ship and have had these contacts and these claims are all talking about being shown this screen, and everybody is shown the screen with the world, the catastrophic environmental damage, and how the world is going to be destroyed and all this sort of stuff. And it petrifies a lot of them. So this is the message now, is this environmental thing. But in the early days, it was all nuclear weapons. It was, we got to stop the nuclear weapon thing. And so it's very important to look at the messages that they're bringing across, and to look at this whole idea about how the universe actually works, because we sort of get stuck into the physical universe, which, as I say, is the basic problem that we have in ufology. Is we keep going back to the physical universe, and we say it's got to be scientific, it's got to be measurable, we got to be able to weigh it and see it and touch it. And no, we don't, because that's where you run into the problem. Is that when you come right down to the basics of quantum physics, you break down the flying saucer into molecules, then into atoms, then into subatomic particles, and then it breaks down into quantum wave fronts and this quantum soup idea that there really is no physical universe. And that's why consciousness is so important, because at the basis of the universe, when you break everything down, to break the physical world down, you get these quantum wave fronts, and that every physicists, a lot of Nobel Prize winners, and they've known this for 100 years, will say that you need consciousness to break down the quantum wave potential to make the particle form a particle. Consciousness is primary and matter is secondary. It's as simple as that. And so that's why I say you got to get away from the physical world, and you got to start looking at what is time and space, how does the world actually work, is it actually physical or is it non-local? And we still get stuck in to try to measure it, feel it, touch it, and of course we're not getting anywhere. We've gone for 70 years watching lights fly around in the sky, trying to measure things, trying to photograph things and stuff like that. And my thing is, what's the definition of insanity? It's doing the same thing over and over again and assuming that you're going to come to a different conclusion. It's always going to be the same conclusion. It's always going to be an unknown. You have to go to the contactees and the abductees. That's the only way we're going to solve the problem of what is actually going on here.
So is there, excuse me, is there a consistency in the stories that contactees have? I seem to hear in doing interviews that there are two different kinds of groups. Ones that have horrific type experiences, okay, and then ones that, receive some kind of messages. Now, I can understand the ones having the horrific experience or some of the separation that, they just can't relax and just accept what's happening to them. Or are there actually two separate groups, one that is doing all of the experimentation and another one that is trying to communicate with humanity?
No, I as I said, I don't believe in evil aliens. I don't think they would come all the way here, having the technology that they have to steal our gold or to, eat people or whatever the scenario is, what they're eventually going to do. It all comes down to, I say, if you want to look at this whole evil good thing, you have to look at putting it in perspective of looking at, for example, what is life? You can say life is great. It's fantastic. You have your opinion. You say it's fantastic. It's the best thing that ever happened. I really enjoy it. And yet you're going to get people who are going to have exactly the same experience, the same life, and they're going to say, this is so terrible, this is so bad, that I'm going to kill myself. And 37,000 Americans every year kill themselves. So it's the same experience. Everything in the world, according to me, is neutral. It's experience, especially if you get into multiple lives. If you're looking at one life, then you can sort of argue, some people have a good turn at life and some have a bad. But if you get into multiple lives where you go into reincarnation, everything changes. Then everything is experience. And so whatever your experience is, you can sort of equate it as good or bad, but to me, it's still all experience. And one of the stories that I bring when I lecture now is I talk about this, and I say we have to move from this one life idea that everything is physical and we have this one life, and then we go to heaven where it's streets paved with gold and pearly gates and all this physical type stuff. And we have to get into understanding what life is really about. And I tell the story of the Moody Blues because there's a bunch of contactees and experiencers who will tell the story. But the Moody Blues are a big time band, sold 50 million albums. A lot of people know who they are. And you say, well, if the Moody Blues told this story, well, then maybe it's true. And the Moody Blues Moody Blues actually tell the story about 1967. They do not deny this. They talk about coming back from Manchester, England, into London. They're in the middle of the night. They see this UFO. They're watching this thing. Then they decide to stop the car and watch this thing, and it lands in a field. And they arrive back in London 3 hours late. And they will all categorically say, yes, they were abducted. And one of the things that is very interesting about the story is, so you say they're abducted, they had a good experience, they had a bad experience. But if you take a look at what the Moody Blues say, the Moody Blues came to Colin Andrews. Colin Andrews, who invented the crop circle, did all these things. He was in contact with 5 different bands who came to him and said that they believed that they had been given a job in life to put lyrics into music. And one of the bands that contacted Colin Andrews was the Moody Blues. And Mike Pinder, who was the lead singer in 1967 of the Moody Blues, and the lead guitarist meet with Colin Andrews after a lecture. And Colin says they're going back and forth, and they're telling this story. And they're saying, they're telling their experience in 67 and all the UFO experiences they've had, and how, as a young child, Mike Pinder was shown these UFOs by this being when he was a young child and stuff like this. And then they tell the story. They said, tell them the story about the hole. And they start telling this story about before they were born. They remember being in a ship, and they had these wise guys. They were at a table, these older guys, and they were being given their assignment that when you get into the next life, that they had lived a previous life together. And when you go into the next life, one of your jobs is going to be to put messages into the lyrics of the songs. This is part of what you're going to do. And they talk, these 2 guys are telling this story back and forth. They're telling this story. Tell them about the hole. And they talk about this hole, this sort of a black thing that they enter the earth. They pick their parents and they enter the earth. And I say this is an extremely important story being told by the Moody Blues because a lot of people are telling this story. And the minute you start talking about situations where it goes back before birth, it is no longer a physical problem. It is a spiritual problem. It is a problem that will go through multiple lives, and it is a pattern. And if it goes back to a previous life, as John Mack showed in some of his abduction, where he tells the guy, oh, when did you see the alien? Did you see him before that? Did you see him before that? And he says suddenly the guy's in another life with the same alien. And it comes to this whole thing that it's multiple, and then you get to this whole thing about, is an abduction or is it a soul contract? Is it somebody who has agreed to come to the earth, has agreed to forget what happened, and to get into this experience, and that we filter it the same as we do with life. We filter it, that energy. We're filtering energy, and you filter the energy. And if you have a negative outlook on the world, when you filter your energy, the energy is going to come out as fear. If you filter the energy through a mindset that's very positive, you're going to see things in the world as being very positive and very enlightening. So that's what it comes down to me. It's got to do with the person as opposed to good guys, bad guys. To me, that's American foreign policy. It's like we're the good guys and you're the bad guys. And it comes down to this idea of separation, which if you believe in the oneness of the universe, that we are all one. And the analogy I always use is we are a tree, and we are all like leaves on a tree. Every leaf on a tree is unique. It's individual. It is different than every other leaf on the tree. And so we are all connected to the tree. We are all connected to the one. The one needs us to survive, and we need the tree. But what we've done in terms of the world is we have, because we believe in this random theory of evolution, survival of the fittest, you're a particle, I'm a particle, we're just random, it's all a big accident, and it's survivor, the fittest survivor wins, rape, pillage, steal, whatever you can, the guy with the most toys wins. And what we do in the analogy of the tree is we say, you're an Aboriginal. You're evil. You're a Mexican. You're trying to steal our jobs. You're trying to climb over the wall. You're Chinese. You're trying to steal all our jobs. You're an Arab. All you think about is trying to blow up children in school buses. And we get into this idea that side of the tree, there's some of the leaves on the other side of the tree that are evil. And we've got to cut those leaves off. And if you understand the oneness of the universe and realize that it's all one, everybody's part of the one, that you're cutting your own arm off. And so when you can create separation, when you can say there's separation, that you're different than me, then I can say I'm good, you're evil, and I can drop a bomb on you and not feel guilty that I kill you, because we get this concept of good and evil. So I have changed my whole outlook about the good and evil thing. I think everything is like a tree. There's oneness. It's the holographic universe. Everybody is one. And that when you start to get this separation thing, that's when you get evil. That's when you start to say, this a nation is evil, that nation is evil. And people will say to me, for example, they'll say, well, aliens are just like human beings. There's good ones and bad ones. And I say, okay, name for me a nation that's evil. Name for me a nation in the world where women do not cry for their children that die, where children are evil from the time that they are born all the way they grow up. There is no evil nations. We make evil nations. The Japanese used to be evil, and we dropped a couple of bombs on them, and now suddenly the evil has sort of evaporated into outer space, and now they're good guys. We trade with them. I remember when I had my first experience, it was the end of the Vietnam War, and that was the North Koreans, and the only good gook was a dead one. That was the scenario of the war, and we talked about wiping them out with atomic weapons and these evil North Koreans and evil North Vietnamese, and now they're good guys. We had Bin Laden was a good guy when he was fighting the Soviets. Then he was a bad guy. And so this good-evil thing changes depending upon what we want out of them. There really are no good people or evil people. There are deluded people, people who think they're doing the right thing, who are doing things that are not very good. But everybody thinks they're saving the world. And that's something I think people really sort of forget. They'd rather say that person's evil than I can sort of ostracize them. I can talk down to them. I can kill them. I can put them in jail. And if we realize that we're all one in the universe, that it's all connected, then you can't be chopping off parts of the tree, because eventually you chop off their part of the tree, they chop off your part of the tree. We just keep chopping limbs off the tree until the tree dies. We either are one and we all live together, and that was Reagan's thing. How the world would unite if we were faced with a threat from an alien nation. We have to realize that we're all one in the universe, and then we will forget about this idea about good and evil, and we're going to realize that everybody's one, and that there really is no evil people that need to be killed.
But in the same breath, we spend so much time worrying about everybody else and how they can take care of us versus worrying about ourselves, making sure, excuse my French, our shit don't stink, and trying to figure out how we can help and support what's going on around us to make it all work for us. And if everybody did that, then we wouldn't have this whole evil thing. But everybody is like looking out for themselves, looking out for the money, and there's so much separation. I feel like it's the separation that brings in all the discord.
It's a separation. It's that idea of separation, that people are different, that we are against each other. We are survival of the fittest. You've got it right there. Once you move that separation away, and all you can really do is really take care of yourself. You can basically do what is right for yourself, that you really can't save anybody else. And I found this in terms of belief systems, that you really can't go and convert anybody, because belief systems are very set. You'll take a look at all the major social and political movements. We're all the people who are protesting. Like, for example, right now in Hong Kong, all the people that are protesting on the street of Hong Kong right now in this social upheaval are all young people. They're all teenagers. And that's why the Moody Blues, and I go through a whole lecture where I talk about all the different people, band people that were abducted, and there's quite a few of them were abducted, and why this happens, and why the aliens are so interested in music. And that is because music, the people that are doing music are influencing that generation. When your child grows up, from the time they're 0 to the time they're 9 years old, they think that you're the hero of the world. As soon as they're 10 years old, they know you're an idiot. They see you making mistakes. They see you fighting with your husband. They see all this kind of stuff, and they realize you're an idiot. Stay away from me. My friends are my friends now. I don't want you near me. I don't want to go on holidays with you. And it's that generation between 10 and, say, 25 years old that changes the world. They're the ones in the 60s that sort of started the gay rights movement and the civil rights movement and all the different movements. It's all this generation. And that's why the aliens are so interested in musicians, and why so many musicians have been abducted, is that they're targeting that age group, because they realize that once you're 25 years old, we don't care about you anymore. Your views are set, and nobody is going to change your views. And I've banged my head against a wall enough in my life, especially on the UFO issue, to know that people, once their views are set, almost nobody, unless they have some enlightening experience where they see something, they will never change. Their views are set, and it's that generation that is 10 to 20 years old or 25 who are looking for something new. They're looking for a new idea. That's who you have to influence. And that's why aliens abduct young children, because they want to get them before their head is filled with all sorts of political, religious ideas that they can't change.
That's a really interesting concept, and I don't disagree. But why abduct? And this is where one of the areas I really wanted to get some of your insight on. But you're talking about them abducting the musicians, but then there's the whole concept of channeling. You know, and you were talking about Hillary Clinton channeling, you know, but there's the whole concept of channeling, and why couldn't they just give the musician the information? You know,
well, they do. Santana is one, for example. I'll give you a story of Santana. Santana was a big musician in the 60s, 70s. He gets his music. He sits against a wall. He has a yellow legal pad, and he channels an archangel, Metatron, the same one that, what's his name, James Hurtak, had encounter with in 1971. He got taken through the universe and wrote this book on UFOs and what Metatron has shown. So Santana channels Metatron. And here's the story. So in 1997, he's doing his channeling thing, and this is where he's getting his lyrics and stuff like, and he gets this download message from Metatron, and it says, you haven't made an album for 15 years, and we are going to put you together with the top musicians of the time, and we are going to put you out on the airwaves. And the message they give, I can't remember exactly, but it's the, you're one with the universe and you're important, and the standard message to tell the people. And we're going to put you out, and we're going to put you back on the airwaves. And he says as soon as he gets this message, he channels this message, he says he starts getting phone calls, and he gets phone calls from Rob Thomas from Matchbox 20, and he gets phone calls from and I'm going to forget his name, Eric Clapton. And they all these musicians phone him up, and they say, we don't know why we're phoning you up, but we think we should do something. We have to do something with you. We should do an album or something. We can't figure what's going on here. So they do this album. 2 years later, in the year 2000, they put out an album called Supernatural. It wins 9 Grammy Awards, more than Michael Jackson, won 8. His is a record. This is 9 Grammy Awards. Rob Thomas clearly states he was abducted in 1999. Eric Clapton, his son is running around. His son is Michael Lee Hill, claims to be his biological son, is running around. He's the guy that's doing all the photographing of the UFOs over the Great Lakes. He claims the government's in contact. He's one of the biggest contactees there is. Eric Clapton writes the music for Communion. Then you get this connection where you have all these different people all coming together and producing an album that sold 30 million albums. So you get these cross things, and you have a lot of musicians. Like when I first did the musician thing, I brought it up, and of course, you know what's going to happen. I mean, I give the lecture, and of course, out comes the Satan. It's like, oh, this isn't aliens, this is Satan. Satan's ruining our kids, and Satan is putting this stuff into the music. And so what I did is I said, okay, if Satan's doing it, let's go back to ancient music. Let's go back to music before. And what I found out was, well, Elvis Presley was satanic. It was considered satanic music because he incorporated black rhythms in his music, and everybody knew that the blacks were satanic. So of course, because he brought the black music in and this rhythm, the black rhythm, into his music, he was satanic, and people would lose their jobs in 1950 for playing Elvis Presley. Jazz was considered satanic because it was played in bars, and bars was where loose women and alcohol and drunken people hung out. So that was all satanic. And then if you go back to the ancient music, because my mother was a church organist for 40 years, my sisters played in a religious band for a tour of the country and stuff like that. I went back and I looked, and it's the same story, different day. I mean, Mozart, Beethoven, they were all getting these downloads. They were all talking about their automatic writing. I go through piles of different songs that came through automatic writing, both religious songs and rock and roll songs. This is something that people are getting all the time, this type of download, this channeling thing. And what it comes down to is right brain, left brain thing. While it is you have a right brain which is linked to the universe. You have the left rational brain, which I call sort of the idiot brain that is when you're trying to meditate. It's the one that's talking. It won't shut up. It's the rational brain that says everything's physical and there's no paranormal stuff and stuff like that. And if you use meditation, you can block the left brain, and you can have these sort of religious experiences. If you use psychedelic drugs, I do all these sort of write-ups on psychedelic drugs and how that kills the ego, blocks the left brain, and you have these people having these visions of the oneness of the universe and stuff like that. And all it is, the channeling is the same thing. It's being able to shut the left brain down and allow the right brain to channel into this thing. So there's a non-local world, and the left brain is the filter. The left brain is the filter that blocks all that sort of non-local, whether it's religious material, paranormal material, channeling, all that kind of stuff, is blocked by the left brain. And there's even experiments done in Australia where they can actually now block the left brain by using magnetic stimulation of the left side of the brain, and they can actually make people have savant type abilities of drawing, of doing different tasks that savant people can do, that just by blocking this left brain. So it's an issue of all of it's the same. Like abductees will say, our story's all right, but don't bring up channelers. They're different. And I say it's all the same stuff. It's all people just finding another way to get the left brain blocked and get into that non-local world. However you do it, there's ways to do it. Even inventors use different methods. Edison used a thing where he would take 2 steel balls and put them in his hand, and he would sit in his laboratory, and he would sit there, and then he would sort of meditate, and he would fall asleep. And as he fell asleep, he'd go through the hypnagogic state, go from awake to sleep. And as he did that, he would fall asleep, and his hand would let go of these 2 steel balls. They would fall into a steel bowl at the bottom of on the floor, and that would wake him up, and he would immediately write down what was in his mind. And Van Gogh did the same thing. There was a bunch of people who used this thing. They used keys, they used steel balls to go through this process of going from awake to sleep through this state, write down what was in their mind. And Edison had 3,000 books where he kept all these notes of these different things. And all it is finding how to get into that non-local state where all the inventions are, all the non-local stuff, where the spirit is, where the understanding, where the Akashic record, all that stuff is there. It's just you've got to block out that left side of the brain to get there.
Well, one of the things that I have learned over the years in doing this show and talking to different people that have, I'm going to say intuitive gifts, just to make it simple, is that there are a lot of people that work in that area that are all dyslexic, which I find really interesting. And people that tap into psychic abilities and whatever, I believe are tapping into that information that you're talking about. And so do you think that there is a correlation to, the way that the brain processes information in and of itself to being able to tap into this information better?
Oh, exactly. I mean, there's one person you should have on your show. I don't know if you've had her on her show, is Dr. Diana Powell. She used to work for John Hopkins. She was at Harvard with John Hopkins, so she's familiar with the UFO thing, but she's more into ESP. She's a neuroscientist, trained at John Hopkins, was at Harvard, wrote a book on ESP and lost her ability to practice psychiatry. Had to go in front of a board to prove she wasn't crazy, to get her psychiatric license back. She wrote this book on ESP. I met her at a conference in Philadelphia. I talked to her, and she's into savants. And that is where you see this idea of Asperger's. If you look at how many people in history have had Asperger's disease, Einstein, all the major inventors, all these different people who were able to memorize stuff, and you see this same thing. It's the left brain damage. Now, Diana Powell works with savants. And what she works with most is nonverbal, that the worse the damage is, the better this left brain is caught out of commission, sent for coffee, or however we want to say it, sent off so that the right brain can do its action. She did a presentation in August at the Parapsychology Association in Concord, California. And she got no publicity. It was exactly like UFOs. It was like I said, when I quoted her thing, I wrote up her work. I said, if it was a fair world, this would be Nobel Prize. But because it's paranormal stuff, it's like it's going to be totally ignored. And that's exactly what happened. She was totally ignored. What she did is she would work with nonverbal autistic children. And she found out that a lot of these had this very high ability at telepathy. And the one particular girl she had is a 10-year-old girl in the United States. They're withholding exactly where she is. She has two caregivers, and one of the caregivers said to Diane, she says, I think this girl's reading my mind. So what I did is I said to the girl, I said, can you tell me, how do you say I love you in German? And the girl, because now you can talk to these nonverbal autistic people, because now you have keyboards and they can punch stuff into keyboards. Before you couldn't communicate with them. So the girls typed this into the keyboard. I love you in German. And they're going, wow, this girl's never been to Germany, never doesn't speak German. And she had it dead on. So she contacts Diana Powell and she says, this girl is reading my mind. She sent her some video clips of things the girl had done. So Diane goes there, and under very stringent scientific conditions, double blind, all this kind of stuff, with microphones, 4 cameras going and all this sort of stuff, she starts to test this young girl. And she's giving her entire sentences. Like, you know how it is in NESP. I give you a number between 1 and 10. You get it. And you think, man, I've saved the world. Man, I got one number out of 10. She was giving her targets of 18 and 19 digits. And this girl was picking them off. She would give her entire sentences. The girl would pick it off. So then Diane gave her the ultimate target. And this is what I said. This is Nobel Prize stuff. She gives this girl, this nonverbal autistic, she gives the target. It's a 162-digit number to the caregiver. The caregiver's behind this wall. The caregiver looks at the number, and the girl starts to type out this number. 162 digits. She gets it wrong. She's got 7 digits wrong. Diane goes to the nonverbal autistic. She says, you didn't get it right. The girl immediately starts punching the numbers in again. On the second try, she got it. 162 digits. Absolutely nailed it telepathically. And that's what Diane says. It's these nonverbal ones where the damage is the worst, and that they're trying to teach this girl to speak. And Diane believes that once they start to teach this girl, the more she learns to speak, the less ability she's going to have to be able to do this kind of stuff. And there are a pile of these kids. There's one from the United Arab Emirates that a newspaper wrote an article on, and I dealt with a reporter and said, I'd like you to do more stories on this girl. It was the same thing. This girl was picking off these 9-digit numbers and sentences and could basically pick up everything. And that's the thing, is the left brain is damage is very severe. And if you take a look at savants who are able to do this mathematics and memorize songs, or like Jim Peake, the guy who was the official Rain Man, the actual Rain Man, read 12,000 books and could tell you backwards and forwards, word for word, what was in all 12,000 books. His brain, it was the same thing. It had this left brain damage, this severe damage. And that's what you find with savants and these people with these impairments, is that even though it may take away from part of the ability to talk or to button your clothes or whatever, it opens up this other part of the brain that is able to tap into this non-local world and do these unbelievable things that you can't even imagine the stuff some of these savant people can do.
Well, I mean, I've seen shows with them on it, and it's just amazing where, you know, especially the number one and the memory stuff, because there's things that I can remember, and then there's a whole lot that just don't stick at all.
Yeah.
Ever.
I mean, sure. I mean, you take a look at the 12,000 books. And this guy could read 2 pages because his brain was there's the part that between the 2 brains. I can't remember what it's called, but he didn't have that part between the 2 brains. This guy could read 2 pages at the same time. 1 page with his right eye, 1 page with his left eye, and go down the page. And in 6 seconds, he could read both pages. And this is the guy that read 12,000 books, and backwards and forwards. And there's one of the guys that talked about consciousness being a key to the universe was a guy by the name of Wheeler, who won the Nobel Prize in the 1960s for physics. He's the one that said that it's a conscious world, that if you think there's separation in the world, you're wrong. It's all connected, and consciousness is a key part. This is another guy who could remember everything he'd ever read, and he could recite it word for word, including the footnotes. So you get this kind of stuff. This is not the brain. This is the brain tapping into an Akashic record or something out there. It's not in the brain. This has been known since the 1950s that the brain is doesn't have a memory center. There was a guy by the name of Lasher who cut all the pieces of the rat brain. They teach the rat to run through the maze, and then would cut out a piece of the brain. Then they take the next rat and they cut out this piece of the brain. And they cut out the entire brain eventually, and each of these rats that had a part of the brain kept going through the maze. So they suddenly realized that there is no memory center in the brain. And it wasn't until they invented the hologram that they suddenly realized that the brain works like a hologram, that it's non-local, that this memory is everywhere, that you can cut out part of the brain and the other part of the brain still has the memory, like the same as a hologram. You cut a hologram in half and all the information is still contained in the two pieces of the hologram. And that's the same idea of the tree. It's this idea that everything is one, that the universe is this giant hologram and that everything is non-local and that you can tap into it. And that's the whole thing, is being able to tap into the hologram, that the information is not out there, it's everywhere, it's inside yourself, that everything is inside yourself, and it's a matter of finding out how to tap into it. And as I said, the government has known this from the word go. You can talk about free energy and the government is stupid, they don't know what's going on. As I said, in 1950, the Canadian government absolutely stated, they were told by the American officials, that mental phenomena was part of the flying saucer thing. They knew the importance. So they've been working on mental phenomena. They've been working on this since the 1950s. And the second thing that happened, this happened in this conscious download that I had, was I got these ideas. It all just came to me instantly, that how this all worked. The one item that came to my head was this top secret document that says mental phenomena was involved. The second, I mentioned this Dr. Eric Walker before. At one of the interviews we did with him in 1991, and from time to time he'd blurt stuff out. He would just get mad and he would say, and he said, look, we were asking about the control group. Is there still 12 people in the control group? And he was saying, look, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And it was like, didn't know what this meant. That 1991, I didn't realize until 2012 what this meant. He said, what do you know about ESP? And the guy that was interviewing you didn't know. So he answered his own question. He said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. He's talking about the control group that runs the UFO, the whole UFO cover-up. You will not be taken in. Very few people understand about it. And that popped into my head. And the third thing that popped into my head was another high level. So you have Walker, who was an assistant secretary of defense. You have the Canadian government. Then you have Ben Rich, who was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, which is the top black ops technology unit. It developed the SR-71, the U-2 spy plane, all the drones, the stealth fighter. This is where it all came from. He was the president. He's giving a lecture in 1993 at UCLA to the engineering alumni. The last slide he shows in the lecture is a flying saucer. And he says, we now have the technology to take ET home. And everybody in the audience laughs, except for Jan Hartson, who's now the international director of MUFON. And he and a guy by the name of Keller are in the audience, and they say, can you believe you actually said this? They went, and these questions after about how does this work, he says, we've discovered the mistake in the equation. We now know how to do it. It's not going to take a lifetime to do. We have the technology to take ET home, and we have to, we've discovered the mistake in the equation, but it's going to take an act of God to get it out of Congress because it's so deep black. People are asking these questions. End of that. Ben Rich is heading for the door. Jan Hartson heads after him. And he says, I've been interested in this whole thing my whole life, because he had this dramatic experience at 9 years old, 30 feet away, this flying saucer in his backyard. So his whole life was dominated by flying saucers. He says, I've been interested in this my whole life. Ben, I want to know, how do they get here? How does the propulsion system work? And Ben turns around and he says, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And Jan didn't expect the question, so he said, I don't know. It means everything in time and space is connected. And he said, that's how it works. And he walks out and gets in his car. So we have high level, top black budget guy, Canadian government, and Assistant Secretary of Defense, all indirectly telling us, not being prompted, but bringing it up, saying, what do you know about ESP? That ESP is a key part of this whole thing. And when you understand how it works, then you start to understand the whole principle of why it's so important and why they might cover it up. And it has to do with this whole thing that you can fly a craft, that the original craft, they found it didn't have a steering wheel, that it was being flown by some sort of mysterious method. And when I gave my first consciousness lecture in Phoenix in 2013, I was approached, a woman wanted to talk to me. I didn't know what it was about. She comes on the Monday morning. I have this secret meeting with her. She says, what did they tell you about me? I said, I don't know. I'm just supposed to meet with you. She starts telling me about she's doing remote viewing. She's doing this, and she's working for the government, and all this stuff. And she's in her 70s. And I go, okay, whatever. I mean, you hear all these weird stories. And then she says, oh, and I was flying the ship last night. And I said, you were what? I said, you were flying the ship? You mean like the flying saucer? She says, yeah, I've flown 3 of them. I fly them all the time. I said, you flew the flying saucer? She says, yeah. I said, well, how do you do that? And she says, you do it with your mind. And when she told me that, I suddenly realized, why she wanted to talk to me, because she was trying to tell me it's consciousness. That's how it's done. That's how they get here. That's how they fly the thing around. That's how they can move through time and space. And then, so I from that point, within 12 months, I had 24 people that I found or who had come to me who said they'd flown the ship. And I'd always say, hang on, how do you do it? And they'd say, every single person without exception said, you do it with your mind. So that's what it comes down to. It's this military thing of being able to fly a craft. And I actually show a video. In one of my lectures, I show a video, 2004, of an experiment done at the University of Southern Florida where they take 25,000 neurons from a rat brain. We have 100 billion neurons in our brain. And we have this idea, well, you have this center does this and visual, and you need all these different centers. And we have this big brain so we can do all this sort of stuff. And we're so powerful. We're so magnificent. We're these human beings, whatever. They take 25,000 neurons from a rat brain. They put it in a petri dish with electrodes on the bottom. And they stimulate these electrodes and they wire it to an F-22 simulator. And they send these signals back and forth. The plane's going up and down. And they teach 25,000 neurons that all start to connect. And they start to communicate with each other. And this 25,000 neurons flies a simulator, an F-22 top fighter simulator, which shows the power of the mind. And where they're going with this thing is the ability to fly a ship, to interact, a symbiotic relationship where you can sort of manipulate ships and material. And so that's why the consciousness thing is so important, that people, if they realize the power of consciousness and where it's coming from and realize that there's multiple lives, we start to understand the UFO situation in a completely different light as to what's going on. It's really got nothing to do with free energy. They're not here to really save us. It's this whole aspect of understanding how reality itself works. And reality at its basic form is consciousness driven. You can't have physical matter, and there's a number of Nobel Prizes who will back this up, that you cannot have the physical world unless you have an observer, unless you have a consciousness that breaks down the waveform and forms a particle. Consciousness is the basic element of everything. It's at the basis, and that's why I think it's so important. That's why I spend the vast majority of my time on this, because it's given me so many answers once I got on this track.
Well, one of the things I find interesting in your whole conversation about using ESP to move the craft, there is the Vimana book. I mean, David Hatcher Childress talks about it all the time, where, they say it's an ancient text, but of course I have to go digging to see how ancient. And in my opinion, it wasn't that ancient. It was, I think, from the 1700s, something like that, but it talks about the Vimana and how they operate and blah, 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 blah. And I'm reading through this book, and my assessment on how they operated was all based on mind control, because, and it didn't say that, but you read the instructions, and that was the only place I could go with what they were talking about. I think other people reading it wouldn't make any sense. And I find it interesting that it's kind of coming back full circle, and if that book was written in the 1700s, whenever it was written, it wasn't contemporary, to have it talk about mind control, moving these ships, it just adds validation to that whole concept.
Yeah. A lot of it's coming full circle. I mean, if you take a look at ancient Hindu, Buddhist teachings, I mean, you look at quantum physics. I mean, quantum physics, that's where it's going. I mean, one of the key guys was Schrodinger, who did the Schrodinger equation, talks about this whole thing about one of the key elements that is true is Atman equals Brahman, that the small mind is equal to the universal mind. And this is a quantum physicist guy, and he claimed to be an atheist. He didn't believe in the personal God type thing, but he basically said that this is one of the truest things that was ever stated. This whole idea that everything is connected and that the small mind is part of the big mind. So this is stuff that's been around in Eastern culture for a long time, and now you're looking at quantum physics guys who really don't want to go there in terms of what this all means. But that's basically what they're talking about, is this idea that consciousness is producing things, and that everything is connected, and everything's entangled and this sort of stuff. And that's been around for thousands of years. And because we went into this sort of Newtonian physics and we had all this technology, we sort of bought into this physical world that, everything is physical and we got to gather up toys and this sort of stuff. And we sort of dropped all the sort of spiritual thing and left that for the church. And now it's coming back in. And even when it first was announced, the first announcement of this idea of the fact that you need consciousness in order to get the physical world came from Bohr and Heisenberg in 1927 at the Soviet conference. They first announced this idea, and Einstein was furious because Einstein believed in this sort of physical world. You can't go past the speed of light, and he accused them of trying to bring mysticism into quantum physics. And he said, you're not going to do it. You're not going to drag this in here. And sort of accused them of trying to bring religion back into science because of this concept of the fact that there really is no physical world and that it's all this conscious thing. And it's like a dream. And it's, the consciousness builds the physical world. And we sort of are living in this sort of illusion, thinking that everything is physical. When in fact,
but they get so hung up on the word God. They can't put that word to the side and use some other term.
Yeah, exactly. It all gets into this thing of terminology. Sure, everybody's sort of fighting about this sort of stuff, but we still have these sort of common elements where people are starting to agree on these, even though they don't like it. This idea about the observer, that you have to have an observer to have something physical, and yet the world, the biggest problem I think is we keep going back to the physical world. Because we think that we need our physical stuff, we need our cars and stuff, and we're doing so good in this sort of stuff. So we keep going back and forgetting the fact that it's all space. That if you take all the human beings in the world and take out all the space between their subatomic particles, you're left with a pile of matter the size of a grain of rice. It's all space. And we still think things are solid. And so when someone says, oh, the alien took somebody out through the wall, we say, well, that's impossible because it's solid. And if you understand that it's all space, that if you have a neutron in your studio, a nucleus in your studio, that the electron is a marble 38 miles away and the rest of it is all space, you suddenly realize it's all space. So how hard could it be for an alien to take a person who's all space and put them through a wall which is all space? We just have the wrong assumption of what's going on in the world. And when you start understanding how the world really works, you start to understand, how do they fly the ship? How do they put people through walls? How do they get from here to there? How does all this work? It starts to make sense when you get away from that physical world view of how the world operates.
Well, I remember years ago, we're talking the early 90s, I was giving a presentation on our multi-dimensional universe and started talking about quantum physics and suggested that all the quantum physicists go down to their local metaphysical bookstore and catch up on their reading because all of their answers would be found there. And, a few people appreciated my candor, but maybe not all of them.
Absolutely true. Yeah, it's absolutely. But they don't want to go there because it's just ufology plays the same game. We want something scientific. You don't want to be the wacko who's going to be talking about the mystical elements of the thing because you're not going to get a grant. You're gone. You unless you've got tenure, you're finished. You don't want to go to that thing. So we always want to say, oh, we're scientific and we're trying to measure this thing. And I was like, forget about the science thing. Because you're playing the game. You're playing this physical game. We got to measure it and we got to weigh it and all this sort of stuff. And we got to play this game that it's all physical and it's not physical. And so most people, even though they believe it, like in the National Academy of Sciences, which is the top group of scientists in the United States, there's 2,000 scientists, there's only 4% in the National Academy of Sciences who believe in any sort of paranormal, mystical type phenomena, and there's only 7% of them that claim to have any concept of belief in God. And that is because it's it's like the Vatican. If you did believe in ESP or you did believe in God, you sure aren't going to announce it at the National Academy of Sciences because that's the end of your career. You are not going to get a grant anymore. So it's this kind of thing that people don't realize how politicized science is, that unless you are really, really well established, and even if you are established, Josephson is one prime guy. Josephson won the Nobel Prize for physics for I forget if it was for the Josephson effect when he announced that he was working on ESP, Cambridge University announced that no graduate student would be allowed to work under him. This is a guy who won the Nobel Prize. Was basically ostracized because he made that move and brought in this metaphysical, mystical element to starting to look at it. His career was basically over.
You know, I just think that it's a shame. And it's not just the UFO field. You hear the same thing when in archaeology or any of the sciences, when they uncover some piece of information that doesn't fit the status quo or the little box that they think you should be in.
Yeah,
I'm just letting you know we probably have about 3 minutes before the music comes up, so we need to.
Okay, yeah, that's why when people forget that when you have organizations, they give out licenses. So you're a member of the medical society or the pharmaceutical society, and you have to have a license so that if you step out of line, they pull your license, and that's how it works. It's all very controlled. It's all very much like a hierarchy where the people who have the power want to maintain the power, like the president, like the people in government. The idea is really not to do something good; it's to stay in power. It's to continue this power. And the National Academy of Sciences is no different than the Vatican, trying to keep the Roman Catholic Church and all the scandals together, and avoid the touchy issues. It's about staying in power, and people have to realize that's what it's about. It's really not about trying to solve problems.
Okay, not sure what to say to that one.
People have to. I think people just have to realize what's actually going on. That we sort of have sort of illusions, and in ufology, we try to sort of suck up to the scientific world, and like people will say, I'm an open-minded skeptic. And I say, no, you're not. You're an idiot. I mean, you can't be an open-minded skeptic. It's like being sort of pregnant. I mean, you're either skeptic or you're gullible or you look at the facts. I mean, to be an open-minded skeptic is to say, I'm going to be a friend with a skeptic, but I'm also a friend with the believers. I don't want to offend anybody. And that's what I think we're making a mistake in the UFO community, is we're trying to get the scientists to join our side. And the scientists are vested. They can't come out because their career is based upon grants. And the grants are given out by the guys with the power, and the guys that have the power are trying to maintain the physical worldview. So you're never going to get the scientists to come over to our side. You just have to say, we're the ufologists. We're going to solve the problem. We're going to do it. We don't need scientists. We don't need philosophers. We don't need anything. This is our job to solve. And I guess that's the last thing I could probably say, is that you can only take care of yourself. You can't save the world. All you can do is do what you think is right. I believe everybody comes into the world. They pick their parents. They pick the things. All the world's a stage, as Shakespeare says. All the men and women are but actors. They have their entrances and they have their exits, and each man plays many roles. You have made your decision when you came in, who your parents would be, what you were going to work on in life, and you are working on your own things that you came into life to do, your lessons to learn, whatever. And when your life is over, you will be asked only one question: how did it work out? It was your game. It was your stage. You picked the players. You can't save anybody else. All you can do is what you do. And when I started out, I started with Edgar Cayce, and the thing that always stuck with me with Edgar Cayce in the 1970s, before I got into UFOs, was a statement that he made which said, knowledge not used is sin. That if I have the knowledge, I have to get it out. That whatever gifts you've been given, you have to work on them. To whom much is given, much is expected. We can only save ourselves. We can only do what we can with what we have, and that we should be doing. If we've been given a lot, we've given in a rich country, we've been given a lot of information, we've been given a lot of insight into how the world works, and it's up to us to put that out. That you'd be better off being some idiot who knows nothing than somebody who knows all that we know and to do nothing with it.
And on that note, we need to call it a night, Grant. But that's a great I mean, it's true. You know, I don't even want to start a conversation because then we'll just keep talking. So I'm just zipping my own lip.
There you go.
Okay.
Well, I enjoyed talking with you.
I had a great time talking with you. You're just so full of information. And so your website, presidentialufo.com, any other place that I should send people to get information from you?
No, that's it. If they go there, I have a Facebook page where I post most of my sort of new stuff, but no, that's it. They can get it from there. I should be updating it more often, but I'm sort of a researcher and I sort of fail at a few other things and try to publicize stuff, but I'm so busy trying to figure out stuff. So
yeah, I hear that.
Presidentialufo.com is the place to go.
Okie doke.
I'll try to update it more often.
Okay. It's good. There's lots of material on it. So anyway, I'm zipping. You have a great night, and we will talk to you again soon.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
That's Grant Cameron. His webpage is presidentialufo.com. And I'm Dr. Rita Louise. You've been listening to Epic Voyages Radio. Be blessed.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.
You say